The last thing I want to do is to go over the accessibility guidelines and the style guidelines that have been introduced in this learning activity to make sure that we've successfully completed all of them. So the first one in the accessibility guidelines is to add the HTML language attribute, and sure enough, we did that. You did that attribute in the opening HTML tag. Headings 1 through 6 are used to create organization and meaning. And we did. We used heading 1 through heading 3, and that's okay if you don't use all of them. But the ones that you do use, you use them to effectively organize the material and keep the user informed of where they are in the page and in the information. Add alt attributes to images that provide equivalent text. And we were able to do that so that in all of our image tags, we have added this alt attribute that has a description of the image that can be read to somebody who's not viewing the images, but is using a screen reader to be told about the images. Text for links is informative and meaningful. Here's wherever you have a text link, that the words that are a part of the text week are informative. They let people know what's happening. They're meaningful. They're not generic, like click here, but they actually have meaning. They're meaningful words that you use, and we did that. The next one is use the title attribute to provide clear information about what will happen by clicking on that. And we can check that title attribute, excuse me, by finding it in each A tag. The other way we can check it is to hover, and it will show itself, right? There's that title tag coming up there to describe what happens when you click on it. So those are the accessibility guidelines that we've introduced in this particular activity, and we've used all of those. Now let's look at the style guidelines. File names and folder names. So notice the name of our file is learning.html. The name of the folder is resources. Our outside folder is begin_html, right? Want those folder names, only lowercase letters, numbers, and the underscore. No caps, no spaces, no other special characters. And so that pattern existed. It's on all of the images. Now I've done most of those for you, so that's pretty easy to follow along. But when you're saving your own image files and your folder names, be sure and follow these rules about that. Also use meaningful, simple names for all files. And for HTML files, use the .html extension. So we followed those style rules. In the HTML code, always keep your code tidy, clean, and well-formed. You should be able to look at the web page or look at your code. It should be neat and tidy, be organized, make sense, line up, and have blank lines where it's helpful and not where they're not needed. So keep it neat and tidy. Use lowercase element and attribute names. So HTML is case insensitive, but a good convention is to keep them all lowercase letters. Quote all the attribute values. So every time you have an attribute value, right, you have name equals, and then everything needs to be in quotes, closing and opening quotes for each value of the attribute. Add the alt attribute to images, and that, notice that this is a duplication of the accessibility guideline. Many of the accessibility guidelines are also good coding standards. Define width and height attributes for image elements, and we showed two different ways that we could do that. And sure enough, on our image attributes, we've added height and width attributes, here using width and height, here using the style attribute. So, and then avoid code lines longer than 80 characters. And we were able to do that in most cases. Occasionally we had a URL that was too long to fit in 80 characters, and we left it to span 2 lines. And in our keywords case, we ended up having more keywords than can fit on 1 line, and we allowed that to span more than 1 line. On the overhead, here this describes the overhead that we did, that we used the HTML5 doc type, that we used the opening HTML tag with that language attribute. the 5 meta tags that we described and needed to use here, also the title tags. And that we always use opening and closing body tags and head tags. I said that backwards, right? Opening and closing head tags and body tags and opening and closing HTML tags. And those are the style guidelines and accessibility guidelines that were introduced in this learning activity.